Hello, I'm Alice. Back when I was in college, life was a simple journey towards earning my degree and enjoying my days. Then, along came Samuel. He had a noticeable charm, though somewhat overbearing. Initially, I wasn't particularly drawn to him, but he was persistent. One day, he made the bold move of visiting my family home unannounced. He confidently approached my father, greeted him with a broad smile, and made his intentions clear. "Mr. Hudson, I'm Samuel. I've been dating Alice, and I'm here because I truly care about her. I want to assure both you and Mrs. Hudson of my sincerity." My dad was surprisingly impressed by Samuel's straightforwardness and old-fashioned respect. That evening, my father took me aside, his expression serious. "Alice, that young man Samuel, he seems reliable, with a strong character for showing up like this. Maybe you should consider seeing where this goes." Taking his advice, albeit somewhat reluctantly, I agreed to go on a date with Samuel. To my surprise, Samuel's charm came through when he dialed back his intensity. He was actually quite amusing and showed a genuine interest in our conversation. Gradually, his persistence began to win me over, and we started dating more seriously. It wasn't a cinematic romance filled with grand gestures or dramatic moments, but there was genuine comfort and enjoyment in our time together. Soon, college was behind us and there was Samuel proposing in front of my entire family. It felt right, so I accepted. Everyone was overjoyed, especially my parents. My father was particularly moved, warmly welcoming Samuel into the family. Life accelerated quickly from there. We got married, settled into a cozy home that my parents helped us choose, and then welcomed our son Jack. Those days were filled with the laughter of our baby, sleepless nights, and the joys and challenges of turning our house into a home. Samuel invested his energy into his new venture, a car repair shop, which my father helped finance, equipping it with the latest tools. It was a gleaming showcase of chrome and fresh paint. Samuel proudly showed off our son at the shop, declaring Jack and the business his greatest accomplishments. As years passed, our life settled into a routine of family dinners, weekend barbecues, and the usual small arguments over finances and household responsibilities. Jack grew up quickly and soon left for college, seeking his adventures, leaving me in a home that felt overwhelmingly empty. Meanwhile, Samuel's once thriving workshop began to struggle, continuously draining money and accumulating debt. My father's attempts to keep the business afloat only increased the tension between Samuel and me. It all came to a head one Thursday when Samuel returned from a frustrating meeting with my dad, visibly agitated and angry about being undermined. "He's driving me insane, Alice. Your dad. He still treats me like I don't know what I'm doing," he vented, his frustration palpable as he tossed his keys onto the table, where they skidded and fell to the floor. The keys clattered to the floor as I picked them up, my voice steadied to keep calm. "Samuel, he's just trying to help. Without him, we wouldn't even have the shop," I reminded gently. Samuel turned abruptly, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Oh, so now you've chosen your side? Your dad has completely brainwashed you, hasn't he? Convinced you he's a saint. He just loves having control over me, pulling the strings." As time passed, Samuel became increasingly remote and resentful. I did my best to keep the peace, especially for our son Jack's sake, but even he began to avoid home, clearly sensing the growing tension. One chilly evening, while I was tidying up after dinner, Samuel slumped into the kitchen, his expression twisted in disdain. "You know, Alice, you used to be quite a sight. Now, just look at you." I froze, a half-dried plate in hand, his words stinging like a slap. "Excuse me?" I managed, incredulous. "You heard me. You've let yourself go. It's like you don't even bother anymore," he accused, leaning lazily against the doorframe, his arms crossed as if he were passing judgment. Setting the plate down, my hands trembled with a mix of anger and pain. "And what about you, Samuel? When was the last time you looked at yourself? When did you last treat me as more than just your housekeeper or cook?" He scoffed dismissively. "Please, Alice. I run a business. I'm out there every day working hard. What do you do?" Infuriated, I cut him off. Just sit around getting old and fat. Is that it? He didn't respond, merely turned and walked away, leaving me in the silent aftermath of our crumbling relationship. Life continued, and the day came when Jack, filled with both pride and sorrow, packed up his belongings and moved out to pursue his dreams, leaving me feeling bound to life with a man who only saw me as a shadow of who I once was. Then, the sudden death of my parents blindsided me. Their plans for a European trip were cut tragically short. In my shock, Samuel was already circling like a vulture over the inheritance. "Alice, we need to handle your parents' estate. It's what they would have wanted," he urged, his concern never quite reaching his eyes. We met with the notary, who solemnly revealed that according to my parents' will, part of the estate would be disclosed now and the rest in a year. Samuel's impatience was almost childlike, eager for what he expected to be a substantial inheritance. However, the will's terms were not as he hoped. The large, ivy-covered family house was left to my future grandchildren and their guardians. Jack surprised us one day by arriving with a young woman, a wedding ring gleaming on her finger. "Mom, meet Brianna, my wife." His announcement left me reeling, yet it soon became clear he had plans I hadn't yet understood. Brianna's presence brought a calculated charm to our household from the moment she stepped in. She danced around Samuel, showering him with compliments about his business prowess. "Samuel, you're incredibly sharp. I can't fathom how you endure living with someone who fails to recognize your worth." Her words coaxed rare laughter from Samuel, a sound that had grown foreign in our home. "Well, Brianna, we all play the hands we're dealt, but maybe you're seeing something I missed," he replied cheerfully, their exchange sending stings of betrayal through me. In no time, Brianna and Jack began to scheme together, their hushed tones and secretive glances leaving me feeling excluded and obsolete. They treated me as if I were a relic, too cumbersome to remove, yet too outmoded to value. On one particular evening, they dressed in their finest and prepared to leave, their laughter echoing like an afterthought. "Where are you headed?" I asked mechanically, already anticipating the sting of exclusion. "Dinner at Marone's, just a simple family dinner," Brianna said crisply, her emphasis on family piercing sharply. I stood waiting for an invite that evidently wasn't forthcoming. "I see. Enjoy your evening," I managed, masking my hurt. Samuel simply shrugged, his apathy like a second skin. "No need to wait up, Alice," he called out as the door slammed, sealing my solitude within the echoing walls of our home. When I urged Brianna to assist around the house, her reactions were exaggeratedly indignant. "Do I look like your maid?" she would retort, her complaint quickly reaching Samuel or Jack, who invariably supported her without hesitation. "I'm merely trying to maintain a tidy home," I would defend myself, feeling absurd with a spatula in hand as I stood in my kitchen. Samuel's dismissive gestures were all too familiar. "Alice, she's carrying your grandchild. Maybe cut her some slack." The irony of his statement burned hotter than the roast I overcooked. Tired of being the sideline character in my own life story, I sought refuge in neighborhood cafes. These spots became my retreats, where the familiarity of the baristas with my coffee order provided a small comfort away from the domestic turmoil. One stormy afternoon, as I ducked into my preferred cafe, I unexpectedly ran into Julia, a dear college friend. Her delight at our reunion was evident. "Alice, it's been forever. Let's catch up over coffee," she suggested. We settled into a cozy corner, with hot coffee warming our hands. Julia filled the air with nostalgic stories peppered with laughter. However, her mood shifted as she recounted a somber memory. "Remember that guy from college? The one always after the rich girls?" she inquired, her spoon clinking against her cup thoughtfully. I nodded, uneasy. "He ended up marrying one, convinced her he was in love, but all he wanted was her money. She lived a miserable life," Julia shared, unaware of the parallels drawing in my mind. A chilling realization dawned on me as Julia's tale seemed to reflect my situation, forming a vivid image of Samuel in my thoughts. I hastily steered the conversation elsewhere, not ready to dive into those murky waters just yet. Once home, Haunted by Julia's words, I knew it was time to confront Samuel directly. I found him nonchalantly browsing a magazine in the living room. Taking a deep breath, I steadied myself. "Samuel, we need to talk," I announced, more composed than I felt. "I met Julia today. Is it true, Samuel? Did you marry me just for my money?" I asked, unable to mask the tremor in my voice as he locked eyes with me. Samuel straightened, his expression sober. "Let's be honest, Alice. You were the perfect solution at the right time. I had debts, and you had a way out for me." His blunt words hit me, a mix of betrayal and an odd sense of relief washing over me. The truth, harsh and unfiltered, laid everything bare. My life, as I had known it, was nothing more than a facade. Things took a drastic turn when Samuel declared we were moving. Not just any move, but into my parents' old house, the house that wasn't meant to be ours yet. And the worst part? He hadn't even bothered to consult me. "We're moving to your parents' place, all of us. It'll be better there, especially with the baby on the way," he announced casually over breakfast. I almost choked on my coffee.
What?
Why wasn't I included in this decision? "It's my family home, Samuel." His reply was chilling, devoid of any warmth. "Honestly, Alice, when have I ever needed your input for anything that matters? I've been looking forward to leaving that cramped house and finally enjoying life a bit. Your parents' passing just made it easier." His audacity left me speechless. Then came the real shock. He had sold our house. "I've handled everything. I sold the house and bought a new car for myself and one for Jack and Brianna. We're going to start living a little, Alice." I felt completely sidelined, discarded as if I were just another item being packed up and moved. The following weeks were a blur as we relocated to the spacious house I grew up in, which now felt alien and unwelcoming. Brianna, now heavily pregnant, assumed the role of the queen of the castle, dictating where things should be placed with merely a flick of her hand, treating me more like a servant than the mistress of the house. Once her baby, a boy with striking blue eyes, was born, her demands grew. She handed him to me as if I were a nanny. "Here, take him. I need to rest. And could you tidy up a bit? It's starting to look like a pigsty in here." Life settled into a grueling routine. I was up at all hours, tending not just to the baby, but also to endless chores Brianna imposed on me. One particularly exhausting day, while I was knee-deep in laundry and baby formula, I reached my breaking point. "Brianna, can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite my clenched teeth. She looked up from her phone, visibly annoyed at being interrupted. "What is it now, Alice? I'm your mother-in-law, not your servant. I can help with the baby, but you need to start doing your part around the house too." "It's also your home," I asserted. Brianna laughed, a sound as chilly as the frost in February. "My part? I am doing my part. I'm raising the next generation. Isn't it enough that I allow you to stay here?" "Allow me? This is my parents' house, Brianna, not yours," I retorted, my voice rising with each word, driven by months of pent-up frustration and resentment. She stood, her face contorted with anger. "This house is for the guardians of my child, which seems to be just me at this point. Maybe if you behaved better, you'd be more than just an inconvenient guest in your own home." The tension that night at dinner was palpable, like heat shimmering off the pavement. We all sat there, silently pretending to be invested in the meal. As we sat at the dinner table, the tension was palpable, but it was nothing compared to what Samuel was about to unveil. With a grim resolve, he set down his fork, the sound echoing through the room, drawing all eyes to us. I could feel Brianna's smug look on me, predatory and expectant. "I've had enough, Alice. This charade has gone on too long," Samuel declared abruptly. "What are you talking about, Samuel?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. Without a word, he slid an envelope across the table toward me. "I'm talking about these divorce papers. I've signed them. It's over, Alice." I stared at the envelope, my heart sinking even as a strange relief whispered through me. I knew our marriage had been over in spirit for a while, but Samuel's cold, public dismissal was a harsh blow. I picked up the papers, my vision blurring as I fought back emotions. And where am I supposed to go? I managed to ask, my voice more steady than I felt. Not my problem anymore. Pack your things. The house belongs to my grandson now, and frankly, you're just taking up space, he replied coldly, his words cutting deeply. Brianna's smirk from across the table told me all I needed to know about her feelings. She leaned in slightly, her voice a whisper meant only for me. Finally, some peace around here. Jack, my son, sat silent, his gaze fixed on his plate, his quietness a deeper betrayal than Samuel's sharp words. Rising from my chair, the scrape against the floor felt unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Fine, I'll go, I stated, my voice calm but inside, a storm raged. I walked away from the dinner table, my movements measured and dignified, and began to pack years of my life into a few boxes and suitcases. That night, I checked into a hotel, the loneliness enveloping me. The next morning, propelled by a restless need for direction, I visited a lawyer. Fatefully, I ran into Julia there. Her face etched with worry, she rushed over to me. Alice, what are you doing here? Her voice laden with concern. I could ask you the same, I replied, mustering a weak smile. She sighed, pulling a photo from her purse. It's my son. He's in trouble. His bride-to-be left him, and she's pregnant. He wants to find her, take responsibility for the child. She handed me the photo, and my breath caught. The woman in the picture was unmistakably Brianna. That's Brianna, I gasped, the pieces falling into place with a sickening certainty. She's married to my son, and she just had a baby. We sat down, and I spilled everything. The dinners, Brianna's remarks, the divorce. Julia listened intently, her expression darkening with each word. This changes everything, she stated grimly. We need to find out the truth. A few days later, I returned to the house under the pretense of collecting some last items. While there, I discreetly obtained a hair from the baby's brush. The wait for the DNA results was agonizing, but when they came, they confirmed our worst fears. Jack was not the father. Julia's son was. Resolved to confront the tangled web of lies, I decided to meet those who had betrayed me. Walking into that house, my heart pounding, Julia beside me, her presence a steadying comfort, we stepped into the living room. The shock on Samuel's face as we entered was almost worth the ordeal. I'd endured enough, and as Samuel tried to remain nonchalant, a smug smile crept across his face. Well, if it isn't Julia, still following me around. I got what I wanted. I married a rich fool, he said, glancing at me, his smile wavering as he sensed a shift in the atmosphere. That's where you're wrong, I countered, feeling the weight of the truth I held. First, let's address this supposed happy new family of yours, I continued, turning to Jack and Brianna, who watched nervously. Brianna's eyes flickered, looking for any possible escape, as Julia stepped closer. Brianna wasn't just seeking a loving family, she was after the money, right? Julia's voice was sharp as ice as she brandished the DNA test results. Brianna's complexion turned ashen. What is this? Jack asked, his voice quivering as he accepted the papers from Julia. They're proof, Jack. Proof that you are not the father of Brianna's child, I declared, my voice steady, my heart racing. Brianna's carefully constructed facade fell apart under the weight of her exposed deceit. She grabbed her bag from the floor. You can raise this beggar's child yourself, Julia. I don't need him, she hissed, storming out as dramatically as she had entered our lives. With Brianna gone, I turned back to Samuel, who watched the unraveling scene in dawning horror. And now for the second act, I announced, pulling out the second part of my parents' will. Samuel's eyes widened as I unfolded the document. According to this, everything you thought you'd gain by discarding me, you lose. The apartment is worth $550,000. It's all mine. The business you cherished is also mine. My father never trusted you. He ensured I would be protected. Oh, and the house? You've already sold it. Samuel collapsed to his knees, his expression crumbling. Alice, please, I didn't mean you did, Samuel. And now you face the consequences, I cut him off, my voice resolute. Jack, who had been silent, finally spoke. Mom, I'm sorry. I was so wrong. His apology was profound, but it couldn't erase the years of betrayal. I know, Jack. I hope you find your way, I said softly. To Samuel, I was firmer. Get out, Samuel. You and the empire of lies you built at my expense. It's over. He tried to plead, but I was finished with the lies, the manipulation, the pain. As they left, the house felt different. Emptier, yet somehow fuller. I stood in the silence, feeling the weight of past years lifting. I had no grandchildren, and this vast, echoing house was mine alone. I had lost much, but gained my freedom and my future. Living in the apartment my dad left me felt like a different world. It was quiet, just the city's hustle below and the occasional clink of my paintbrush against the jar as I sat by the huge windows, canvas before me. I found peace here, a peace long missing in the chaos of my previous life. I sold Samuel's car repair shop last month. The new owner was eager, full of plans to rejuvenate it. I felt nothing as I signed it over, just the smooth slide of the pen across the paper, and then freedom. As for the family house, I rented it out to a nice couple with 2 young kids. They send me photos of them playing in the same backyard I grew up in, a gentle reminder of a life continuing beyond my narratives. The house is alive again, filled with laughter, just what it deserved. I've taken up new hobbies, things I'd never had time for before, like painting landscapes and still lives. There's something profoundly calming about blending colors, about the initial brushstroke on a blank canvas. I've also started salsa dancing. Walking into my first class, I felt out of place, a middle-aged woman among young dancers. But once the music kicked in, none of that mattered. It was just rhythm and movement, and for that hour, all my worries melted away. Julia and I keep in close touch. It's intriguing how life loops back. Her grandson, who I once thought was related to me by blood, is growing up swiftly. Julia often brings him over, and we spend time at the park or just playing in my apartment, which I've stocked with an assortment of toys. Look at him, Alice, Julia said during their last visit, her eyes sparkling as the boy toddled around, chattering to himself. Can you believe how quickly he's growing? I handed him a soft stuffed bear, smiling. They grow up too fast, don't they? But it's wonderful to watch them take on the world. Sometimes I see Samuel around town. The last time was at a newsstand where he was just another face in the crowd. Our eyes met briefly, mine free of anger and sorrow, his quickly shifting away. I continued on my way, my head held high. As for my son Jack, we talk from time to time. Things between us aren't the same and maybe never will be, but there's a thread of hope. He's seeing someone new, a woman he describes as kind and heartfelt. Mom, I'm taking it slow this time, he shared over the phone last week, his voice cautious yet hopeful. I really like her and I want to do this right. I smiled to myself, pleased to hear the maturity in his words. That's great, Jack. She sounds wonderful. There's hope that one day he'll settle down with someone who truly appreciates him for who he is. And if they have children, the family house will be there, ready to welcome another generation filled with love and laughter. The prospect of being part of a family, in the true sense of the word, lingers in my thoughts, a serene and fulfilling possibility that aligns with the newfound peace in my life.
My name is Paige. I still have some bitter feelings remaining from my past about my divorce 3 years ago. My husband, Colt, was 5 years older than me. We worked together and had no children. We weren't a particularly bad couple. We were a very normal couple. The only problem was my in-laws. My in-laws and my husband's grandmother all lived together. I knew that his grandmother was living there since we got married, and I knew that her health wasn't great either, so I visited frequently. Whenever I did so, I was always treated like a brat. For example, I was sometimes treated to lunch while I was there. I think I'll order a pizza today, my mother-in-law said, Hallie. That sounds good. You don't have to cook then. You should thank her, my husband added, addressing me. Thank you, I said, confused but polite. No problem, she replied. Up until then, everything seemed normal. But when the pizza arrived, "I'll take this with me. You can get the bill," Hallie stated to me. "What?" I exclaimed in surprise. "Why did you think we were treating you? You weren't trying to take money from old people, were you?" she asked, glaring at me. "No, I mean, since you said you wanted to order pizza." I tried to explain, but she interrupted me. "What are you saying? Am I the one who's in the wrong here?" Without waiting for a response, she added, "Anyways, I'll have you pay for it. I'll be eating inside," and walked away. I reluctantly paid the bill and was about to take my seat when my mother-in-law said, "You should have gotten water for me." How inconsiderate. I'm a little flustered. "We ordered pizza for you, so you should at least help out a bit, right?" My husband, Colt, continued to boss me around. "We're older, so don't make us do the work," his mother added. I had no choice but to get her some water. When I returned, there was only an empty tray where the pizza had been. "Oh, thank you for the water. Can you throw that empty tray away?" the mother-in-law asked, acting as if nothing had happened. "Hey, throw it away," Colt added. "But I haven't eaten yet," I protested. "Really? I didn't notice. Well, there's still some left." "For now, just take the tray away," my husband said dismissively. I get up from my seat again and throw the tray away. When I came back, I found that the remaining pizzas had already been divided, leaving me with only a few fries. I hated this kind of meanness. I knew I shouldn't let them bully me, but to use food like this was worse. "So, this is how it is," I said, standing up. "I'm going to leave then. That's so mean." "You shouldn't get mad at me for something like this," my mother-in-law shot back. "So you did it on purpose," I uttered angrily. "I thought maybe you were starting to get dementia," I added, furious. "It's even worse if you do it on purpose." I grabbed my things. "I'm going home," I continued. "You're leaving?" "I'm gonna stay here," my husband said, indifferent. "If you want to go home, you can walk." To which I objected, "I'll take the car. Why don't you walk home instead?" I finished, leaving my husband at his parents' house. The next day when he finally came home, he said, "Mom was really mad at you yesterday." I gave him an indifferent glance. "I don't care. It's her fault for doing that," I replied. "She just forgot, I'm sure," he insisted. "No, it was on purpose. There's no way she'd talk to me like that if it was an accident," I uttered firmly. "You weren't any better either," I accused him. "What was I supposed to do there?" He excused himself. "You could have saved some for me," I continued, frustrated. "Just forget about small things like that. Just do what I tell you, and we'll all be fine," he responded. "You just want to have fun bullying me more, don't you?" I asked. "You really only see the negative side of things, don't you?" "I feel bad for you," Colt replied, grabbing his wallet and leaving. That was typical of him. Whenever he was in an inconvenient situation, he'd run away. I was thinking about divorcing him every day, but we'd only been married for a short time, so I thought I'd try to improve our relationship. That changed the day I looked at my husband's phone. He had left angrily again, but this time, he left his phone behind. I didn't pay much attention to it at first, but then I saw a message pop up on the screen. The person messaging had a girl's picture as their contact photo. Curious, I unlocked the phone and read the message. That's when I found out my husband was cheating on me. Before he came home, I took a picture of the phone screen. Later, I was planning to check more of his messages on my computer, but my husband returned unexpectedly. He checked his phone and looked flustered. "Did you look at my phone?" he asked. I pretended to know nothing. "Why?" "I didn't look." "Is there something you don't want me to see on there?" I attacked while defending myself. "No, there's not." "Did anything come in?" he asked nervously. "I don't know. I heard a few message notifications," I said casually. "Okay, I'm going to bed," he said, clutching his phone tightly. "Okay," I replied, watching him as anger simmered inside me. But oddly, I also felt a sense of satisfaction. From then on, I checked his phone regularly, collecting evidence of his affair. It turned out he had been cheating on me since before we got married. He had been planning for me to take care of his parents so he could have an easier life. After gathering enough evidence, I sent it to his workplace, his partner's house, and his parents' house, and left divorce papers at home. Then I went to my parents' house. A few days later, my husband contacted me, furious. "You're in a lot of trouble for what you sent me," he shouted. "What do you mean?" I asked calmly. "It's forgery," he accused. "No, it's not. I took pictures of it on your phone," I replied. "I'm not getting a divorce," he declared. "If you don't want to play along, we can take this to court. I'm sure you'll lose the case," I said, not backing down. The word court startled him and he hung up on me. A few days later, he called again, saying he wanted to talk. I didn't want him coming to my parents' house, so I suggested meeting at a nearby cafe. I arrived on time, waiting for him with a smile. When he walked in, he threw some papers on the table. "Hey, scammer," he said smugly. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "This," he said, showing me the evidence I had collected. "Everything I collected is true, and I haven't committed any fraud," I said. He then pulled out his phone and showed me a website. "Look, you can create fake message screens on this site, so your evidence is worthless," he said, smirking. I looked at him and replied calmly, "So, since you can create fake messages yourself, you think my evidence is invalid, and you can avoid a divorce? Is that what you're saying?" I questioned demandingly. "Exactly," he said, crossing his arms with a grin. "Oh, now you see. If you apologize on your knees, I'll forgive you," Salt added. I smiled back, but my words were icy. "You're still naive. Do you think I'm done collecting evidence? No, I haven't stopped. If I need to, I'll hire a detective to get more evidence. I haven't stopped yet." His grin faded. He knew I wasn't bluffing, and just like that, the power he thought he had over me slipped away. I took out a thick envelope and said, "I haven't finished my investigation yet, so I haven't sent it in yet. But I have evidence of your meeting with your partner. If I send this in, it should be even more damaging, right?" I concluded. My ex-husband looked uneasy. "Well, it could be someone other than me." "You just won't give up, will you?" I asked and added, "Can you say that in court?" He was at a loss for words. "I'm going to try and get alimony from you and your partner as well," I continued. "I'm not hearing any of this," he exclaimed, almost in disbelief. "It's obvious you would," I replied. "I didn't tell you earlier because—" "Why would you think this wouldn't happen?" I inquired. "Because it's fake," Colt burst into flames. "And we're not getting a divorce, right?" he asked. "Give it up. I'm divorcing you and I'm going to get my alimony. I've already made up my mind and I'm preparing now," I said firmly. He was stunned. "Even if there wasn't evidence of cheating, I would have divorced you because I don't want to deal with your parents," I added. "You're saying it's my mom's fault?" he shot back. "She didn't mean anything by it. I can't believe you're so narrow-minded to get angry over something that small," he reproached me. "I'm okay with being narrow-minded," I said. "If you won't go along with the divorce, I'll go to court and try to get higher alimony," I pressed. He must have realized I was serious about going to court, or maybe he didn't want to take a chance at paying higher alimony. My husband signed the divorce papers on the spot and asked me to lower the alimony. I accepted, and we divorced. That was 3 years ago. I thought it was all over, but apparently it wasn't. One day, I heard my ex-husband tried to contact me. He sent a message to my parents' house, saying he had something he wanted to talk about. I thought everything was over, so I wondered what he could want now. Despite the strangeness, I agreed to meet. Then, my ex-husband and his parents came to my parents' house. "Long time no see," he greeted awkwardly. "Yeah, what did you want to talk about?" I asked, already feeling bored with the situation. "It hasn't been that long since we divorced," he said with a smirk. "It's only been 3 years," I clarified. "I'm not going to stand here and talk to you out here," Hallie uttered, annoyed. "Will you let us in?" she added. "Rude as always. Come in," I said. I took them up to the guest bedroom and sat down with my parents. "So what can I do for you?" I asked, trying to get to the point. "I thought we'd at least talk for a bit," my ex-husband started. "Regardless, we have plenty of time for that later. Right now, we still have a lot of time together," he continued. I frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" He smirked again. "I forgive you. You deceived everyone by divorcing me a long time ago, but you know what I did was wrong, right?" I stared at him. "I haven't deceived anyone, and I have no intention of coming back," I answered without hiding my surprise. His mother cut in. "Colt's saying he's forgiven you. Don't be so stubborn. Just come back." If you come back, we'll forgive you. My ex-husband continued. My grandmother needs someone to care for her as well. Let's talk things over. I finally understood what was going on. Ah, I see. So that's why you came to call me back. Your grandmother wasn't doing well even when we were married, but at that point, she didn't need someone to care for her. She was living quietly on the second floor of your parents' house. Now that she needs a caregiver, you want me back for that? I laughed bitterly. Ha, that's not happening, his mother protested. It seems difficult, but... I cut her off before she could finish speaking. I said it's not happening. My parents and I laughed at the absurdity. Soltz looked perplexed. Why not? I said I'd forgive you if you take care of her. You can even live in my parents' house. Isn't that a good deal? Why would I go back to live a life of torture? I said coldly. Besides, it's both practically and legally impossible. What do you mean? Solt asked, confused. I held up my hand. You haven't noticed yet? I'm married, I replied. What? His eyes widened. I'm wearing a wedding ring. About a year after we divorced, I remarried, I explained. That's cheating. You must have been married because you were having an affair, he shouted. I rolled my eyes. You were the only one having an affair. I met my current husband after our divorce. He's a foreigner, by the way, not like you, who cheated on me while we were still married. After a pause, I added, after the divorce, my parents encouraged me to go abroad to take a break from everything. That's when I met my current husband. So no, I can't remarry you. And I live overseas now, so I won't be coming back here. I can't believe it, Colt muttered, shaking his head. Marrying some random foreigner? He lamented. You're talking about my husband. Please don't insult him, I said firmly. Also, don't come back here again. My parents are planning to move in with me soon. I'm only here temporarily before we all leave town, I concluded. His mother jumped in. When you were married to Solt, you never took us abroad, she rebuked me. Why would I spend money on someone who only harasses me? I replied. I never harassed you, she protested. Just saying that it wasn't harassment is a very positive spin on the situation, I said sarcastically. Suddenly, something occurred to me. By the way, Colt, what happened to the girl you were cheating on me with? She's not the kind of woman you can marry, right? Did she run off? I inquired. He looked embarrassed. That's right. After the divorce, she disappeared, Colt replied. 3 years ago, her parents had to send me alimony in a lump sum, and I didn't feel any pity for her. Naturally, I thought you knew where she went, I said, surprised. No, he muttered. I guess, with that much evidence, you can't talk her way out of things. It must have been very embarrassing at work as well, I uttered. Yeah, my mother-in-law exclaimed. Because of your bullshit lies, Colt transferred after that, she added. It's amazing that you're still calling it a lie, I replied. Even if it were true, it's a wife's duty to forgive. My father-in-law joined the conversation. I'm not sure I have it in me to do that, I responded. I always taught my daughter that cheating is an act of an animal with no morals, my father added. Seems like you weren't able to teach him that, he said to my in-laws. It's all right, just means that they don't match, my ex-father-in-law replied. My parents, possibly having reached their limit with the insults, began to chime in as well. However, there's no point in arguing over things anymore. Anyways, I can't take care of you guys. For both physical and legal reasons, please leave us alone, I concluded. You sure? You'll regret it, my ex-husband threatened. Why would it? I asked in surprise. I'm happy now and I don't get alone with your parents. Colt lowered his eyes. And her new husband is a young businessman. He's handsome, maybe even too much for my daughter, my mother added. So will you please leave? I continued, and Hallie turned to me. I won't be mean to you anymore. I'm sorry Colt did the things he did to you. Please come back, she begged. My mother-in-law got down on her knees and apologized to me, but I didn't want her to do that now. It's already too late. Besides, as I told you earlier, I am already a married woman. It would be faster for you to find a new wife for Colt, I replied. Colt, who was watching me, gave me a look that I had never seen before. All this time my mom has been saying she didn't do it on purpose, he said. I didn't think that you were really that dense. I never thought you really believed that. Well, they believed that evidence I prepared was fake. So I guess you two are similar in that regard, I remarked. It's only natural to believe in your own son, my father-in-law concluded. It's also the role of a parent to scold their child when they do something wrong, my dad retorted. When my father said this to him, my ex-father-in-law uttered, "Let's go home." The three of them left. I don't know the details of what happened after that. However, according to an acquaintance, Colt is now living with his parents while taking care of his grandmother. As for my ex-in-laws, they seem to have aged beyond recognition. When acquaintances see them on the street, they can't even recognize them. As for me, I've moved overseas with my parents as planned. Their house has been sold and the land has been cleared. My ex-in-laws won't visit me anymore. From now on, I want to live a happy life with my current husband. My name is Camilla, and at 26, I'm a driven career woman. Currently, I share a home with my husband, Sawyer. Lately, I've been contemplating starting a family soon, but Sawyer believes we should first focus on building a house and settling down before considering children. Therefore, we're diligently saving money for our future home. Despite my desire to start a family promptly, Sawyer remains adamant about his stance. Camilla, we need to establish our home first, he says, whenever I broach the topic of children. His disregard for my perspective is disheartening. I've accepted that I need to work harder to boost our savings. Sawyer and I have been married for a year now, and I've noticed a pattern in our relationship. He rarely considers my opinions, a trait that persisted from our dating days. Initially, I admired his strong convictions, but in marriage, mutual respect for each other's viewpoints is essential. I fear our marriage is faltering, especially with the influence of his parents, who live just a short drive away. Sawyer frequently visits them, often using the excuse of cutting down on expenses. I'm just being frugal, he insists. Yet I've discovered he indulges in drinks with his coworkers, conveniently omitting these expenses from his so-called frugality. It's perplexing how stringent he is with me about saving, yet lenient with himself. His frugality extends to trivial matters like conserving hot water and turning off lights prematurely, directives he imposes solely on me. If only he extended the same standards to himself, perhaps our relationship wouldn't feel so one-sided. Every week, when we visit his parents' house, a new problem surfaces. Hasn't it been a year since you got married? His mother chimes in. We want some good news soon. When will we be able to see our grandchild? She inquired for the umpteenth time. Glancing at Sawyer sitting beside me, I see the discomfort on his face. He glares at his mother as if to say, "Don't say unnecessary things." While I share the desire for a child, Sawyer insists on building our own home first. It's inappropriate for my in-laws to pressure me about children when Sawyer is the one holding back. After one particularly tense meal, Sawyer excused himself. I'm going out for a smoke. Once he left, his mother turned to me. Camilla, it seems like you're still working, but if you want to be a housewife, you should quit your job and focus on being a good wife. Maybe that's why Sawyer isn't paying attention to you, my mother-in-law assumed. It felt like I was being blamed for not having children because I worked. But it was Sawyer who wasn't ready. Just quit your job already, my mother-in-law added with finality. Frustrated, I responded, it was Sawyer who asked me to keep working. Why don't you talk to him before constantly lecturing me? I retorted. The shock on her face was unmistakable. When it comes to having children, I want them too, I continued. But it's Sawyer who stubbornly refuses until we have our own home. Instead of nagging at me, why don't you tell your son the truth? Her silence spoke volumes. I excused myself, making my way toward the door. Outside, I found Sawyer, casually smoking as though nothing had happened. You're leaving already? He asked with a hint of surprise. Yes, I replied bluntly, my patience running thin. I won't be visiting your parents' house anymore, I added. Why not? Sawyer's eyes widened. We can save on food expenses, right? He said, trying to justify our weekly visits to my in-laws. You also want a home and children soon, don't you? My husband added. Fed up with the continuous impositions from both him and my in-laws, I snapped, if saving is so important, we'd have more if you stopped going to drinking parties or smoking. Instead of driving to your parents' house just to save the cost of one meal, why don't you save in more meaningful ways? I rebuked him. Sawyer looked taken aback. Everyone needs a break sometimes, he responded. You keep imposing things on me, I continued. Like not using hot water and turning off the lights by 10 p.m., as if that alone will make us rich. You think we can save without you making any sacrifices? If I have to go through all this trouble alone, then I don't need a home. I'm fed up with this. You never sacrifice anything, but you're okay with imposing it on me, I angrily declared. It's not a big deal, he brushed it off. No, it is a big deal. How much patience do you think I've had all this time? I fired back, my anger boiling over. What infuriated me most was his pretense in front of his parents, acting as though I was the reason we hadn't had children. I'm tired of being the only one asked about grandchildren. It's not me who doesn't want children. It's you. I've been saying it for a long time. I want children soon, so stop being so angry when the truth comes out, I said firmly. Seeing Sawyer struggle with my unusual outburst brought a slight sense of satisfaction, but it didn't resolve anything. I turned away, gazing out the car window, ignoring him. A turning point came a month later when one of my relatives, my father's brother, passed away. He left behind several pieces of land, a luxurious mansion, and a lavish lifestyle. Sawyer's reaction to my uncle's passing was revealing. Impressive, Sawyer mused. I didn't know you had such a remarkable relative. A few days later, upon receiving news about my uncle's inheritance, I decided to meet with a lawyer at our apartment. Since it was a matter exclusively related to me, I politely asked Sawyer to leave the room, especially since he seemed uneasy about the concept of inheritance. After 3 hours of legal discussions, I thanked the lawyer and saw him out. To my surprise, Sawyer, who had been home earlier, was nowhere to be found. Assuming he stepped out to give us space, I started preparing dinner. Little did I know, 3 months later, Sawyer would approach me with an unexpected request. There's something I want to show you, he said, taking me for a drive. Excitement welled up as we entered the residential area, but confusion grew when the car parked in front of a certain house. I looked around puzzled and turned to Sawyer. Whose house is this? I asked, but he simply pressed the intercom without answering. A moment later, my in-laws emerged from the house, smiles on their faces. You finally made it, my father-in-law said cheerfully. When are you and Camilla moving over here? I was momentarily stunned. Moving? I echoed, my voice tinged with disbelief. We're thinking of moving in by the end of this month, Sawyer announced confidently. I stared at him, stunned. Before I could react, my father-in-law continued. Well, it's about time. Camilla, don't you think it's selfish to keep shifting the responsibility of having children onto Sawyer? His words hit me like a slap. I shot a glare at Sawyer. Why had he brought me here, especially when I had made it clear that I wouldn't visit my in-laws anymore? Sawyer, I said, my voice low and tense. Why are we here? You know how I feel. He shrugged casually. Don't get so angry. I thought if we live together, we can bridge the gap between you and my mom. Besides, he added with a smirk, this will be our new home from now on, so you should cooperate on the children issue too. I stared at him in disbelief. Live together? Since when was that the plan? My voice wavered between shock and frustration. I told you I wasn't coming here anymore, and now you're talking about living with them? I uttered, not hiding my indignation. Sawyer sighed, rubbing his temples. It's a two-family house. My plan was always for us to live with my parents eventually. So what's the problem with living in a two-family house now? He continued. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The very idea of living with his parents, after all the tension, seemed impossible to me. How did you even manage to afford this house? I demanded, feeling the weight of our savings, or lack thereof, bearing down on me. My dad and I chipped in the money, Sawyer explained nonchalantly. Our savings are empty, but it's fine, right? I stared at him, utterly confused. Empty? Sawyer, we were saving for our future. How could you do this without consulting me? I questioned angrily. Relax, he said, brushing off my concerns. I heard your uncle's inheritance is worth $690,000. If you use that money to repay us, it'll be fine, my husband added. I was stunned. What? You expect me to use my inheritance to pay for this house? Without even asking me? Sawyer's face hardened. Your money is our money. If you don't like living together, then let's get a divorce, he stated unflappably. He pulled out a pre-filled divorce form from his bag and handed it to me, his name already signed on it. I stared at the form in disbelief before taking it from him. Fine, I said coldly. If living together is the alternative, then divorce is the better choice. I tucked the form into my bag, and as I turned to leave, I added, by the way, I renounced my uncle's inheritance. Sawyer froze for a moment. What did you just say? He asked, surprised as he regained his composure. I renounced the inheritance, I repeated calmly. Without waiting for a response, I left him and his stunned parents behind, heading straight to the bus stop. When I arrived home, I filled in my name on the divorce form and submitted the papers. I wasn't wasting any more time. The next day, I hired a moving company to help me pack and relocate. As I boxed up our belongings, there was a loud commotion at the front door. Sawyer was back. I had the chain lock on, and through the small gap, I addressed him. I'm busy packing. You should stay at your parents' house for a few days. I won't accept the divorce, Sawyer declared firmly, his face twisted in frustration. I raised an eyebrow. But you handed me the divorce form, didn't you? You signed it. That means you agreed to it, I responded. Sawyer frowned. That's not what I meant. Why would you give up on a $690,000 inheritance? That doesn't make any sense, he started persuading me. I sighed, realizing he hadn't grasped the situation at all. Sawyer, my uncle, had debts. His mansion was demolished, and maintaining his land drained most of his money. Renouncing the inheritance was the only logical option, I explained. His face fell. No way. So even if you had inherited the money, there wouldn't have been much left, my husband concluded. Exactly, I said, crossing my arms. You didn't know the full story because you were too busy making plans without consulting me, I continued. Sawyer was silent for a long moment, then muttered, but we could still be together, live in that house. I shook my head. It's too late for that. You betrayed my trust, and we've already filed for divorce. I've moved on, and you should too, I added. He stood there, stunned, as I closed the door, leaving him on the other side. A few days later, I informed my workplace about the divorce. My boss, who had acted as a mediator in our relationship, looked concerned, but I felt a strange sense of relief. During lunch, I told my coworkers, many of whom had attended our wedding, about the situation. Just as I finished explaining, Sawyer barged into the office, his face red with anger. It's absurd that you're talking about the divorce, he shouted. I wish you hadn't mentioned it. My coworkers stared at him in shock, and one by one, they turned away, avoiding him. As the tension in the room grew thick, I finally stood up. Sawyer, I said calmly, you made your choice. Now live with it. He left in a huff, and a few days later, I learned he had quit his job. In the midst of all this, a male colleague approached me, his voice soft and sincere. I've actually liked you for a long time, he confessed, and added, I hope to build a home where we can communicate as a couple and work things out together. I smiled, for the first time in what felt like ages, and nodded.